2 weeks ago when we came to worship, we looked at the foot washing incident in John 13, and we spoke about the idea of serving other people in what we called the covenant of the dirty feet. I was pleased to get a photo yesterday of some of our folks who were out working on the Habitat home. It was pretty muddy yesterday. And apparently, thanks to all that extra rain that we've had this weekend, they took that idea rather literally. This was their covenant of the dirty feet. Then if you're with us last Sunday, you heard me issue a second challenge to set aside 1/10 of your income this week. Just set it aside. Don't even give it. Just set it aside. See how well God could enable you to live on the other 90% before you decided to give it or not. I appreciate some of you came and actually talked to me this week about tithing. And I know that others have been thinking it through. If nothing else, you might want to consider the story of the two men who were shipwrecked on a desert island. One started screaming and yelling, and he says, we're all going to die. There's no food, there's no water here, it's all over. The second man calmly sat down, popped up under a palm tree, began to read a little bit. He said, don't worry, I make $100,000 a week. First man looked at him and said, what difference does that make? We're on an island with no food and no water. How can your money help us? Well, the fellow said, no, you don't understand. I make $100,000 a week, and I tithe 10% of that every Sunday. My pastor will find me. And I think I would too. Now, I know whenever the subject turns to money that it's easy for people to be offended by the whole thing. On the other hand, sometime back I happened to hear about a man who called the church office and he said, can I speak to the head hog at the trough? Secretary replied somewhat icily, I'm sorry, who? Caller said, I want to speak to the head hog at the trough. Secretary said, if you mean the preacher, sir, you could refer to him as pastor or brother, but I would refer that you not refer to him as the head hog at the trough. Man replied, I'm sorry, but I was planning on giving $1 million to the church budget. And she quickly said, hang on, I think I just saw the big fat pig walk in. So whatever you call it or me, the truth is, it's really difficult to talk about as a church about our finances and our personal giving, whether it comes across at least a little self-serving. But then I read these words from 1 Chronicles. I see that the focus of King David, I had to say long ago, was not about him or his folks. His words were about God and his majesty. What does he say? Is he prepared to initiate the task of building a sacred sanctuary for his son, a building that he knew he himself could not construct? He was a man of war, but that he knew that Solomon, his son, could. So he cried out, who am I? Who are my people? That we should be able to give as generously as this. Everything comes from you. We've given you only what comes from your hand. That's a pretty powerful insight into life, I think. It reminds us, first of all, that the ability to give anything, large or small, impressive or not, whatever it may or may not be, that ability to give is a gift itself. Because all things come from God in the first place. Wealth and honor come from you, David says. And in your hands are strength and power to exalt and to give strength to all. That means that even if we've never had the good sense to recognize it so far, we don't have a blessed thing in life, literally, a blessed thing that is ours because we earned it by ourselves. Now, we have to work for what we have. Just like farmers have to physically go out and dig up the earth and plant their crops and water them and fertilize them and then harvest them, before they have anything to show for their efforts. But also like those farmers, if in the end God doesn't send the rain as he just did this weekend, and the sunshine, and the favorable conditions for those plants to spring forth, The efforts of those farmers will never be enough in and of themselves to produce anything, will they? And if you can, since most of us are not farmers today, take that concept and translate it over into your life by simply looking at what are the factors which are out of your control in your life today, which to bring all your efforts to naught if they went against you. Economic downturn, change in the marketplace, layoffs, corporate mergers, a financial miscalculation, even a false but damaging accusation against you. See, the truth is that we're all vulnerable to the vagaries of life, no matter what we do. So whatever we may have in our lives is never solely the product of our own hard work, of our own efforts. Some will call it blind luck, others will call it fate, still others may try to cling to the illusion of self-dependency. But the Bible tells us something very different indeed. It tells us that wealth and honor come from God, period. For it is He who gives us the ability to create wealth. So the ability to give back to Him truly is a gift from Him in the first place, isn't it? That's what almost blew David away when he thought about it. Even with all his other faults, and David had plenty of them, he was smart enough to realize he wasn't smart enough to have done everything on his own. He was smart enough to understand that, in fact, given what he had done, he didn't actually deserve even what he had. So again, it came out in his prayer, almost as an expression of utter amazement. Who am I? Who are my people? We should be able to do this. You know, we could pretty much say the same thing this morning, couldn't we? Forget about your pledge, forget about the church's budget, forget about all those things. What I'm talking about is something as simple as recognizing this one reality in life. The ability to give is a gift itself. Matthew Henry long ago put it, the more we do for God, the more we are indebted to Him for the honor of being employed in His service, for grace enabling us in any measure to serve Him. That means likewise that a gift without integrity means absolutely nothing to the Lord. What does David say in verse 17? I know, my God, that you test the heart and are pleased with integrity. So all these things I've given willingly and with honest intent. I've got to tell you, David wasn't just whistling Dixie on this one. Not only did the king do so himself, the people anteed up for the building project in a truly mind-boggling way. Verse 4 of this chapter tells us, in fact, that David gave more than 110 tons of gold and over 262 tons of refined silver. And inspired by his attitude, the family leaders and tribes of Israel, the generals and captains of the army, gave another 188 tons of gold, 10,000 gold coins, 375 tons of silver, 675 tons of bronze, 3,750 tons of iron, all of which were deposited into the treasury of the house of the Lord. Don't you know that the counting committee that day didn't even make it home for lunch? And when they did, I imagine that they came home sore. Can you imagine it? What's wrong, honey? Why are you holding your back? Well, the offering today down at the Methodist Church weighed several hundred tons. We had to move it all. What those people gave was impressive. But you know what really impressed David? You know what really impressed the Lord? It wasn't the amount. It was that the people offered their gifts freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord while being filled with joy. That means nobody twisted their arms. Nobody put a squeeze on them. Nobody even laid a guilt trip on them. They gave really and freely and joyfully because they wanted to. They gave their gift with no strings attached. They didn't give in order to get back something. They didn't even get a good tax write-off from the whole thing. They didn't give to leverage themselves into a more favorable position with the Almighty so He'd have to do something for them. They didn't even give in order to make themselves look good or to be able to call the shots as to how the business of the temple was going to be are going to be done. They just willingly and wholeheartedly, knowing that God indeed tests our hearts as pleased whenever he finds integrity there, they just willingly and freely gave. You know what I would suggest to you? The testing is more important than the tithing. For without that integrity, our gifts really do mean nothing to him. So Paul wrote it in his famous love chapter to the Corinthians. He said, even if I give all I possess to the poor, but I have not love, I gain nothing. And may I tell you that if you are ever giving to the church just in order to get something back, you won't get anything either. At several points during my ministry, I have sent money back of people who gave it. That sent the treasurer into apoplexy, but I did it anyway. Because it was really clear to me that all they were trying to do was to curry a little church favor, or worse, buy off the Lord with a bribe or a tip of sorts. So I've mailed checks back. I've said, I'm sorry, but we can't accept this because I know the reason you're giving it is not pleasing to the Lord. Anytime people try to use their money as a weapon and not as a sign of their worship, or they want to dictate with their dollars rather than develop in their discipleship, I got to tell you, we don't need your money. And in the end, God doesn't want your money. He wants your life. It's not the size of your pledge that counts. It's the size of your heart. Giving is nothing more or less than a sign of our loyalty. What we give is an indication of what we believe and in whom we trust. It is that simple. Which brings us to make a third observation this morning, which is that giving is not a requirement. It is a privilege. Oh, I know all about the biblical admonitions for us to give, but they're just plain as day. Biblically, our giving ought to be systematic. That is, we ought to plan for it. We ought to be kind of deliberate about it. That's the purpose of a pledge card. Our giving ought to also be proportional, that we should give in proportion to what we have earned or what we have. 10% is the biblical standard, but if you're not doing that, it's okay. You just do what you can do. And try 4 or 5% if 10% increases your need for Xanax. But whatever the case, the point is that our giving ought to certainly be sacrificial. That is, we ought to be giving in such a way that it actually costs us something. We have to give up something else in order to genuinely give to the Lord's causes. But having said all of that, and though I personally believe strongly in tithing and pledging, I'll tell you in the end, giving is not a requirement at all. It's a privilege. It's a privilege. David understood that. I think his eyes filled up with tears because he saw that his people understood that as well. St. Paul tells us that those Macedonians in Greece also understood this. What we can read out of his letter to the Corinthians, he says that out of their most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty, it welled up in rich generosity, and they gave as much as they were able to and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, he said, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. Doesn't that knock your socks off? The Macedonians, who were generally as poor of a people as they are today, they earnestly pleaded with Paul for the privilege of giving to the needs of other people. That would blow me away. It would be like your children coming to you and saying, Dad, Mom, please let me pay for college all on my own. Be like the mechanic at the garage saying, would it be okay if I came over and got your car and left you a loaner, of course, and then gave your engine a total tune-up, a new brake job, and new tires all on the house? It would be like MasterCard calling me up and saying, Mr. Temple, you're not buying enough these days. Please let us credit your account with $10,000. Go get yourself some new things. Pastor, can we please have the privilege? Can we please have the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints? We don't have much. Can we give what we do have? We're not sure what the future holds, but would you let us be the givers and not the getters when it comes to meeting people's needs? My eyes would be welling up with tears as well. See, I've met some of those people in my life. I've been privileged to be the pastor to some who, like those Macedonians, gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. And I have to tell you, to be so poor, they were some of the richest people I've ever known. So what does it come down to? In a few moments, we're going to invite you to come up for communion, and as you do so, there are some baskets. We're going to invite you to leave your pledge cards there. If you don't have them, there's some in the pews, and or there's some at the back table in the northettes. But as you do that, I hope you will hear once again the question that David posed so long ago. Oh Lord, but who am I? Who are my people? That we should be able to give as generously as this. Because here's the answer. You and I, we're the people of the covenant. We're the heirs in faith to Abraham and all of the righteousness that God imputed and imparted to him. We are the sons and daughters of the Most High King. So in the words of Martin Luther, whose Reformation we celebrate this week, 498 years ago, in the words of his magnificent hymn, let goods and kindred go. Just let it go. This mortal life also, the body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. So may God keep this desire in our hearts forever as well, as we keep our hearts loyal to him. And let the people of God in this place say amen.